Hi, I'm Charlton. I'm the technical design lead at Carhartt. High level, a little bit about me. Almost 30 years in the industry, very high level. 10 years in manufacture, 10 years in D2C retail, and 10 years in global wholesale. I've been fortunate to work for some big brands, Next in the UK, Tesco in the UK, and then going to global wholesale, work for Nike. I've worked for PBH. Interesting in now at Carhartt, we have feet in all three of those areas. We're owned and operated manufacturer, we're a D2C retailer, and we're also a wholesaler. So it feels like pardon the pun, but a perfect fit. So enough about me. I'll go around the virtual table in the order that I see them on my screen. So Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. But first and foremost, thanks everyone for being here. I'm really excited to be on the panel, as well as with my esteemed colleagues who are all super knowledgeable. So thanks for that. Steve Meany, global VP of sales at Reactive Reality. And for those that don't know, Reactive Reality is an end-to-end platform. And for us, it powers the most fun, realistic, and scalable online shopping experiences for brands and retailers around the world. Put in other terms, what does that do? What does that mean? We're actually able to, in one-stop shop, create both digital garments in 2D and 3D, as well as avatars in 2D and 3D, and bring together those into a virtual fit and a size recommendation solution for retailers and brands. So that's me.
So perfectly positioned to have a seat around this table. Thank you. Jamie, great to see you. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. So I am Jamie Campbell. I am the manager of sizing and fitting at Human Solutions of North America. And Human Solutions is a global technology company that focuses on collecting, studying, and really implementing anthropometric data for both the apparel and the automotive industry. So really my day-to-day consists of helping brands determine who their customer is, helping them do things like body shape analysis studies, size table optimization studies, and then avatar creation for both internal product development use, but then also for virtual try-on and online shopping experiences. So really everything that we do revolves around the human body, and it revolves around data.
Thank you. And then Sydney, to yourself, do you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. First of all, very happy to be on this panel. Excited to see so many knowledgeable people. So I'm Sydney. I'm from straiqr.ai. We are a fashion tech company focusing mostly on artificial intelligence technologies, and we use those to create a body scanner, which is convenient to use, super quick, creating a 3D model, providing all the measurements, and then beyond that, we also create a virtual fitting room, which essentially allows the user to wear digital garments on his photos. So we don't only provide a avatar or whatever showing where the pressure is, but we actually would show the people how they would like in real life, let's say. And all of that is being used then in a third pillar to create a known fashion brand. But that's digital and a bit under the radar right now. So let's maybe, and I think this also suits this round a bit more, talk about the first two things here.
Very interesting. Thank you. Daina, over to you.
Thank you. Also very happy to be here today. I'm Daina. I'm the CEO of Boldmetrics. So Boldmetrics is a technology that produces an accurate AI body scan. Essentially, we predict body measurements, detailed body measurements across the body without requiring too much effort on part of the user. So you don't need to take a photograph. So this can interact with the user in under 20 seconds to get your body measurements. And these body measurements can then be used for a variety of different things. We support a lot of on-demand manufacturing and made-to-measure clients to generate custom patterns with that. We also work with ready-to-wear brands and retailers to generate size recommendations. We can show how the individual garment will fit across the body. and allow users to look at how this fit would change across these critical points of measure in different sizes, so they can use this information and make their subjective fit preference decisions when it comes to making a purchase, as well as in-store related technologies to allow for sales associates to get their customers in the right sizes without having to necessarily try things on or certainly get measured in store. And we loop in purchase and returns data to allow for continuous learning on the information and provide insights, which we call apparel insights, to product designers so that they can understand their customers from a body shape and size perspective and how this can be used to glean insights on their sizing specifications. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you. And Jill, last but by no means least, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Jill Schwartz, VP of Global Sourcing and Product Development at LT Apparel Group. I'm very excited and honored to be part of the panel today. Well, I started my career in product development in men's 30 years ago. I have the privilege to be part of the LT family for the past 25 years. LT manufacture, market, and distribute children's wear. And our company mission is to help make family lives more fulfilling with exceptional brand, which give kids confidence at home, Carhartt, at school, French Toast, and on the field, Adidas. So I've always been fascinated by technology and innovation, and have been most eager to try and share my excitement with my team. Our team has been exploring 3D fitting for more than 6 years with different platforms. When the call came to phase out our sample room in China, I decided the point of no return is upon us to make 3D virtual fitting an inseparable part of my product development process. We no longer have the luxury to work off physical sample on demand, right? So tremendous shout out to Browseware and the Avalution team supporting our initiative since 2018. While our global team work from home and experiencing different degrees of lockdown, we stay on calendar for Back to School 21 development last year. Well, that said, Back to School 21 product are on their way to us now. Next problem. How are the families going to find the right fit and size for their kids in the COVID age as schools start to reopen? What about our direct-to-school business? What solution do we have to handle fit days, keeping social distance? So I look forward to learn from the panel on how to assist our family with the latest and the greatest fit technology that's available today.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be a good discussion. And I don't know if you guys caught, I hosted 2 panels this morning, and both were around sort of virtual fit and where it is in terms of its sort of infancy and its adoption. And super interesting. And this one is mainly around, so let's assume for a second that virtual fit is widely adopted. Then the question becomes, what kind of data do we need to be gathering or extracting as our consumers are shopping virtually, right? So that's kind of the first angle, which is what data should we be gathering and in which form? So is anybody brave enough to go first? Or I can pick on people.
I can go first, no problem.
Thank you, Sid.
Sure. Welcome. So we need to be gathering a lot of data, actually, lots of different kinds of data. So obviously we need the body data, and there's a lot to talk about there. So I'll leave that for later in the discussion. We of course need to know what we want to put on that body. That is, to be accurate, we need a 3D model of the specific garment. And then if we want to recommend, in order to do so well, we also need to know what the customer likes. Right, so that's data that can look very different depending on what the sources we choose. We could derive some intuition from the body shape and guess, let's say, what the person would like. But at the end of the day, it's really a subjective thing. So that's data we basically have to ask for. And maybe
if you think about, that the body is you could argue it's variable over time, but you could pick it up as a snapshot, right? The product, again, is variable over time, but you can pick it up as a snapshot. The preference piece, I think, is really interesting, is how do we get better at collecting that information?
To be honest, I don't think it's only a snapshot for the first two. I mean, there are a lot of data sets, and in principle, it is a snapshot. That's true, or many snapshots put together to a video and so on and so forth. But what we notice when we work on the data is that it's very biased, let's say. So looking at, in my opinion, important topics such as body inclusivity and cultural diversity, the data that's currently available is really not sufficient to represent well the desires of all customers. So that's, I would say, a big issue. But of course, the question you've posed about how do we get the customer insights about his taste is also an important thing. But there, again, are like 10 angles from which one could discuss this.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, from our perspective, the solution that we have to ask customers online shopping virtual fit and do a size recommendation, the solution that we have is very simple. Actually, we ask customers for their height, their age, their weight, and their birth date. And using the data in the background, that is how we recommend the size. So it actually goes back to that representative data set. But my point here is that we did a test where we're asking individuals to include some things about their body shape. So asking things like the weight distribution of the bust, weight distribution of the bottom. And in the test that we did, we actually recommended the size more often when we didn't include that. So going back to the bias of the data, people are kind of idealized, I think, when they're saying what their body shape is. It's hard for people to really give their true self without some type of, image that goes along with that. So I think that's an interesting point to bring up as well.
So what I've heard is essentially, again, when you think about the data we need to be gathering, obviously body data, obviously product data, right? And then this area around preference data. Is there anything else that we should be gathering from Steve or Daina or Jill?
I don't mind chiming in. Oh, go ahead, please, Jill.
Okay, I'll go and then you go.
Oh, go ahead.
The awkwardness of the virtual panel, right? So so I totally second everybody's sentiments on customer body data, most importantly, accurate customer body data. And I think also, to echo some of the things that Jamie was saying, it's really important as we move towards an era where we're capturing customer body data from our studies, that it's really easy for the consumer and to not have the consumer to put a lot of effort into making that happen. So we've done a lot of studies around this actually, and it needs to be around 20 seconds or less of a consumer's commitment of interacting with it, with whatever the system is, in order to have that system get to that point of customer body data. So in order for things to convert more appropriately, particularly in the online shopping environment. So that's one. So customer body data, that's really easy for the shopper to engage with. And then purchase and returns data, looping that information into the process. So because you could have your initial recommendations, your size recommendations, which is substantiated often on tech pack data, maybe fit model insights on the intended fit by design. But this information could be very different from what you might find the consumer is expecting the fit to be, or how they're engaging with product. And you can glean a lot of these insights with AI and machine learning to understand, actually, this is what we thought the intended fit was going to be through our design process, but this is actually how the customers are fitting into the garments and wanting the fit to be through that purchase and return behavior. And then this data can then be fed into a cyclical process of machine learning updates to that information to provide better recommendations to the consumer and better understanding of how the body measurements are fitting into the garments and how that tends to change with this data. And then a piece on the fit preference that I wanted to add to the conversation. From what we found with fit preference, and I think we could probably all agree, but fit preference is subjective, right? So our philosophy at Boldmetrics isn't that algorithm can tell you what your fit preference is, because it's really kind of unique to you, not to, everybody, your body double, for example. So what we think is a stronger way to approach fit preference is to show, just provide the information to the consumer on how it's going to fit across the different sizes, across the critical points of measure that are important for fit for an individual garment. So if it's, the fit is really important for this particular garment in the chest, waist, and hips, perhaps, then show how it would fit across your top 3 sizes, and then just give that information transparently to the customer. And then they can take this information and make that subjective decision on, I prefer things to be slightly looser around my stomach area, or I like it to be fitted around my shoulders and chest. And so they can take the information provided by algorithms and make that decision, as opposed to an algorithm saying, like, you are definitively this size. Because everybody's different and everybody wants things to fit slightly differently based on how they feel about themselves and how they want to feel in a garment.
Yeah, I refer to fit preference, or I use the analogy, it's like taste, right? Do you like your food spicy or mild, right? Do you like salsa spicy or mild? And it's like, you know what, on different days, it's different things. It's super, super subjective. Steve, did you have a perspective to share?
Yeah, real quickly, and there's lots of good stuff, and so I echo comments that have already been mentioned. I do think there's things that we, as an industry, should think about in terms of what can we currently control, and then what can't we control, and then how do we get from where we are to where we want to be. And so the first place I would put that is actually in the garment space. How confident do we feel in the manufacturing of a medium is a medium is a medium, right? Not just across brands. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about single brand. Does every medium that comes out of the factory, is it the same size? And so let's control what we can control. And I think we're getting there with sort of more modern manufacturing processes, because that way, to the previous points, when we can do visualization, because fit is really 2 pieces, right? There's us and the garment. When we put them together in a visual format, then to Daina's point, which is wonderful, it is, okay, this is now giving me visual cues about how this garment is going to fit. And this is now even maybe giving me text clues about how this might fit. And maybe I do want it to be a little tighter around the hips. Maybe I do want it to be a little looser around the shoulder blades, whatever it might be. But I do think there's a piece around forming that consistency in the garments, because we really do have a lot more control there. And then we can work with humans. And humans are complicated. We are beautifully complicated. So that comes down to preference. Anyway, hopefully that is a little bit additive. I will say, to add on to the garment piece, one other piece of data that I would encourage folks to think about, all right, as you partner with folks, is can you get the semantic data of the garment fabric? So not just how it's going to look, but really how it might flow, and et cetera. So once again, I don't want to boil the ocean here. This is on that pathway to perfection, right? But think in terms of progress.
And I think you're right in terms of like eliminating variables. It's like, let's first ensure that we've got bulk production consistency. So a medium is a medium is a medium, right? I think you raise a good point in terms of fabric properties and how fabric properties affect preference, right? But before I move on and ask that question, Jill, have you got anything to share in terms of data gathering?
Yes, absolutely. I have 2 young adults at home. They're at the same height. They're of the same weight. They wear the same size shoes, but the body shape is entirely different. So, Jamie, when you mentioned earlier how body shape is misleading, could be misleading, I really think this is an area that I have a lot of interest, and I think we should definitely address, because especially in my segment, we serve a diverse population, all sizes and shape. It's very, very challenging, in guiding the consumer to find that, properly fit, best preference garment, because it's so difficult. We got the measurement correct, and yet when they receive the garment, it just doesn't fit properly. So how do we go about it? You guys are the expert. I'm stumped, because I bought a garment home to fit on the toolkit. They're the same weight, they're the same size. It doesn't fit Kira. It fits Isabel perfectly. I don't understand.
So just before I move on, there was a question from the viewers. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to phrase it to Steve. Is Steve talking about manufacturing quality standards and tolerances as a part of fit, and modern tech is improving that? I think the answer is yes, but Steve.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Thank you.
That's probably its own panel discussion, by the way, to be fair to the topic, but yes, in a word.
But I think your point is it's a variable that we need to control. Right. And in
yes,
terms of what we can control and what we can't control, that is something that we can control. So let's control that.
That's right.
Got it.
That's exactly right.
Moving on to, or sticking with the preference topic, and I'll phrase this to Daina, because I know you spoke about the feedback loop, right? And preference, if I think, and I sort of flippantly said, body is a point in time, right? I would say, you've got the evolution of garments and how brands create garments to fit, right? That evolves over time, but it's probably relatively slow, depending on the brand, right? Then you've got the evolution of body shape, and guess what? Every day we age, sorry, but we do, right? And our body changes over time. And then you've got preference. Now, I would guess that preference is probably the most variable and the most subject to change over time, right? Based on different influences. But I think there's a couple of different things. There's fit preference that changes over time based on trend or based on influence, right? And then you've got fit preference that may or may not change based on fabric properties. Any of you guys got a solution for that in terms of how you would capture that data and create essentially a more predictive algorithm around that to start to predict fit preference, essentially?
Well, so as I mentioned before, instead of telling a customer this we think this would be your fit preference, an algorithm saying we think this would be your fit preference, we take the stance of just transparently showing that data to the customer on how it would fit across their body. And we think, that's our philosophy, simply because I think everybody, as I mentioned before, is different. And so for a customer to look at that information and be like, I prefer things to be slightly less fitted in certain areas, then they can use that information from those visual cues and be able to make those decisions based off of their own subjective fit preference. That's always been our philosophy and approach to it. Yeah. And then, what we do, I guess there's sort of like an evolution on how the machine learning models will recommend what we'll show is your top size and then your adjacent sizes and how you'll fit across those three different sizes. There's machine learning that goes into that to substantiate what those recommendations are and to show how it fits. And the evolution of understanding that fit is where machine learning comes in. So it starts with information about the product itself. So if we're working with a brand, for example, and have access to tech pack data, that's wonderful. And fit model data to show how the brand thinks that that particular garment fits a body. And that's kind of like our cold start approach. And then we start to evolve this this understanding of how the garment's fitting across different body shapes and sizes through machine learning. So it starts to understand with the feedback loop of purchase and returns data, actually what is the typical body measurements that fit across the various sizes? How does this differ from the fit model? And the algorithm becomes smarter on how an individual body would fit into a garment and where places would be slightly loose or slightly snug based off of the insights from AI. And so those algorithms then become more advanced over time, moving away from sort of like the data that we start with, that we have available to work with, often with a brand being that tech pack and fit model data, and moving it towards how consumers are actually engaging with the product, what they're keeping, what they're returning, and relating that to body data and relating that to what is the likely body measurements that are fitting ideally into the various garments, and showing that through an understanding of fit descriptions to the consumer across the different sizes.
And I follow-up question, I may have missed this, because fundamentally you let the consumer decide around preference. It's like, here's your body, here's how different sizes would fit your body, and you can decide on your preference. But then when you capture that data and that feedback loop to brands, is that piece included? Because as a brand, we know our standards. Again, to Steve's point about what we can and what we can't control, right? So we know our standards, we know what our target consumer is, right? We know our products, and we know the use preference that we build into our products. But how are our consumers actually wearing those products? And that data behind that, I'll give a crude example, right? I could go and buy a slim fit shirt, but I could buy it in a 2 extra large and it'll fit loose fit, right? And then my sales will tell me that, yeah, double extra larges are loving slim fit. Let's create some more slim fits, right? But in actuality, it's like, no, it's a medium guy that's buying a loose fit. Is it that? Do you get to that level of detail? And not to pick on Daina. If anybody else
keep going, but I want to have other people speak. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I'll just be really quick. It's really interesting as we see with when we start to collect this body data and how customers are actually, what they're keeping, what they're returning, what they're giving, oftentimes with return codes too, which is super valuable. We can start to glean insights on, actually, you thought that this was the average type of body via your fit model data that fits into this size medium for this product or style, but it's actually quite different. And we're finding that most of the customers are seeing that the fit is quite unexpected and it's actually this. And so we can provide that type of data to our brands and give this sort of cyclical feedback loop for the product designers that are looking at sizing specifications and helping them understand their fit model selection process, giving a cyclical feedback loop so that there is a scalable way to collect the body data of their customer demographic so that they can use this to glean insights on their sizing specifications and their understanding of fit for their actual customers. But I'm going to stop talking now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to open it up. Jamie, it looks like you want to talk.
Yeah, I can touch on this too. I think that we at Human Solutions, we collect our data a little bit differently than most everybody else on this panel. Because we conduct large-scale sizing surveys where we go out with a massive body scanner, we body scan individuals, and we create really statistical and representative surveys. And the reason why I'm getting into that is because part of that survey is asking the individuals who participate a series of questions related to sociodemographic data, fit preferences, wearing preferences, all of those things. And what you have in the end is kind of something that you can use from a brand perspective. So if you have access to this data as a brand, you have the ability to easily correlate and determine if there are kind of patterns and correlations between the data. You have the body measurements of a person, the size that they typically wear, though we know that does vary from brand to brand, but in general, the size that they typically wear, and then what their fit preferences are. So being able to correlate all of those things within a specific target market as a brand, that gives you a better insight. And like Daina just said, that may not necessarily correlate with what you've been thinking so far in terms of your fit model and kind of your own market research. So that could be really interesting insight from a kind of product development perspective as well.
Before I move on to the next angle, Steve, Sydney, Jill, any perspectives on this topic?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I just wanted to reply to Jamie and really underline what she just said, because as opposed to what Daina said, I believe that you can move quite some distance towards the customer when it's about the fit preference, because there are all sorts of features which can be used to determine that. I mean, it's not with certainty because, after all, it's subjective. But, you know, watching Netflix, you may have noticed that taste can be somewhat predictable. At least what I get is pretty good. So, for example, body shape is heavily correlated with what kind of fit you prefer. Although the correlation is not like 100% and it's clear what the customer will buy, the probability of what he will buy is certainly influenced by that. And that's something we can know and use to the customer's advantage.
Yeah, I would agree. I was in a conversation, I think yesterday, I used Netflix as an example, right? It's like my Netflix sign-on, I'm guaranteed looks, my interface, I guarantee looks different from yours, right? Because it's individual taste. Steve, Jill, any other perspectives?
I think definitely the consumer, the end user, in our case, the parents will, based on the information we'll provide, they will make the ultimate purchase decision based on the fit information. In our case, you know, we serve from 2 to 18. And up until 12, they're growing constantly. So even though they know the fit, they're going to make a conscious purchase decision, buying a size that may not fit right now, but the child will grow into. And then for another, for the high schooler, they're pretty much grown. So that purchase decision is now very different. And, my kid, is buying a men's sweatshirt size 5XL. She knows what her size is, but she is into the look currently. So all the data that we're doing for that perfect fit kind of work and kind of not work. She knows exactly what she's getting going in that is going to be so, oversized. So, I like what I'm hearing, provide the best information and let the consumer make that purchase decision with knowledge, obviously.
I mean,
I would totally agree.
Children's wear is fascinates me because I think you've got the purchaser and the wearer are potentially different. I also think you've got more, I'll say this out loud, I think you've got more tolerance for being wrong. And I say that because, it's like, my 2-year-old wears 4-year-old clothing, but he's big for his age, right? You've got that sort of adoption of like, I'm buying by size or I'm buying by height, but if it's incorrect, I'll just upsize or downsize.
Size it up.
As an adult, you don't necessarily have the same tolerance. So, sorry, Steve, what are you going to add?
I was actually going to add and once again, I think this is a really diverse group of problems that we're solving for. I think it does, what are we solving for? So I think, if it's a brand or a retailer, they may be trying to solve for this idea of the ultimate prediction of style, preference, sizing by individual consumer. And that's a wonderful, potentially lifelong challenge, quite frankly, given the subjectivity. I think that as we think about using data in the online fit world, I think the near and present goal, at least at Reactive Reality, and certainly for others, should be, how can I just help customers? How can I bring some fun to online shopping? How can I sort of mix and match and see all sorts of things? And how can I gain more confidence in my online purchasing decisions so that I don't order 3 sizes of the same jean, 5 shirts of this, right? If I can just solve for that, guess what? More research will be done, more data will be collected. And then we can ultimately get to some of these really, really high-end predictive models that dive into preference and consumer behavior and things like that. But I would encourage folks who are thinking out there, I don't even know how would I get there? A step would be, how would you just improve that customer experience on your site so people feel more confident in what they're buying today? And right now it's clear people are not that confident.
Because I would go out on a limb and guess that trying on 3 sizes to get to 1 size is not pleasurable. Nobody wants to do that. The problem we're trying to solve is like, so if you know me and you know my size and you know my preference and you know my purchase history, right, then just give me what I want, right, and have the confidence to make it right first time.
I think yes, right, to certainly recommend this is what we think you'd like. I think there's all sorts of social engineering challenges in there. Like, you only serve up people things that they've purchased in the past versus like giving them right choice and all this stuff and about discoverability. But that's another. You keep leaving me off with these like brand new panel discussions. So we'll just maybe close that question.
I should stick to the script. So one of the one of the points is, how can we enable a better data feedback loop between consumers and brands? And I know that Daina and Jamie touched on this, but my experience of working for brands is sales. That's the number one. That's the number one metric that we look at, right? Is what are we selling, and what are we selling more of or less of, right? And therefore, let's sell more of what we sell more of, right? Sales seems to be the number one sort of KPI. How do we bubble up fit and fit preference and what could be a disconnect between, well, you designed this to fit like this, but actually, 80% of the people are wearing it like this. How do you bubble that up to be more of an important KPI?
If I could jump in real quick, maybe this will be the shortest part of this answer. I would look at a very simple metric, and that is not just sales, but net sales. So what did you send out and what did you get back? And that it's the net sales it's really telling you. And for all those returns, what they're really telling you is this does not fit right, essentially. So that's how I would simplify that.
Sales returns, Yeah, and then digging into returns. Anybody else got a perspective?
I'll jump in here. And also, can I just say that ordering 3 sizes and trying on at home and then returning, there is a very important sustainability discussion that we're not going to probably have today, but I shudder to think of it because we need to think of returns as part of a brand's sustainability efforts to become more adoptive of sustainable practices. Because I mean, think of the carbon footprint that is being produced of just shipping ill-fitting product, or that's one of our biggest passions at Boldmetrics. Is like we gotta stop this process. It's not.
I mean, it's not even a sustainable business practice, let alone for the environment.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see that brands and retailers are actually like really starting to care about their return rates. When we first got started in this, we've been around for a long time. It was really surprising at first to see that brands didn't necessarily look to reduce that or even knew what that number was. And now we're seeing a lot more emphasis on it. So I'm really happy to see this moving in that direction, by the way. So I just wanted to add that in. But as you talk about the data feedback loop and how can we better enable this between customers and brands, when we think about this at Boldmetrics, I just think about the sizing, specification, design process and the cyclical data that, or the lack thereof in kind of like current practice. But, as we know, when product designers are coming up with their sizing specifications, there's really like a lack of data that goes into that process for the most part, like a lot of assumptions. So picking like a fit model, which is an individual person, or a dress form, and designing your size medium to fit that one data point, basically that one body, and then creating that gradation for the larger and smaller sizes, and then using, thankfully, what Jamie was talking about, systems like Human Solutions has to provide at least like statistical understanding of, your fit coverage across geographical populations. And I think that's hugely important because prior to that, it was like completely, operating blind. So that is, I think, a huge innovation for the space. And I think the final innovation that I think to make it full circle is in capturing the consumer's body data through like a scalable way to capture accurate body measurements of customers and allow this feedback loop. So you can do these great fit studies through the design process, but then a cyclical feedback loop to really close that loop and understand, this is actually the customer's body measurements. This is actually who is our statistically average customer body shape and size wise that fits into a size medium. This is actually what we use for our fit model. This is a little bit difference there. Sometimes we see actually quite a big difference. Typically, like within the big and tall or plus size categories, we can see it's quite a disparate difference, which is really, I think, low-hanging fruit, just to understand who your fit model is and who your actual customer is for an individual style. That's kind of some low-hanging fruit that we can get that cyclical feedback loop in place to impact those decisions. And then it kind of blossoms from there, a lot of things that we can do if we can close that feedback loop.
So here's your body, and here's your body of your actual consumer versus your body of your target consumer, and then here's the products that they're buying. Do you get to the level of, and here's how they're wearing them? Do you get to that level of detail?
Here's how they're wearing them. We also do segmentation, which is really important actually for the fit preference piece. So fit preference playing into, as Sydney was saying, you can predict fit preference to a certain degree, but I think it's best to predict fit preference. Like it's likely this is your top size and this is your two adjacent size, but show how it's going to fit so you can use that fit preference. But there is something to be said for using algorithms to understand like what is the top size that you do show. So you have to start somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Fit preference can have quite a difference geographically. So at Boldmetrics, we do segment our machine learning models based on geography because we do find that the fit preference and how customers are wearing garments, it can be quite different across various geographical regions. For example, with outerwear, you might find that it's very different in a cold place versus a more warm temperate environment. So like the Canadian consumer, the consumer in Russia versus a consumer maybe that's buying jackets that's in the US and in a more temperate location. So these types of geographical segmentations are really important in inferring what's substantiating an initial size recommendation and showing the fit preference across the adjacent sizes, because there's definitely something to be said there for a difference on the geographical segmentation.
So I'll stick somewhat to the script, and one of the angles was, if the Holy Grail to unlocking individual fit preferences, body data plus purchase history, plus product specification, product specifications, then how can we and how should we begin building a foundation to support this? So it seems like a few of you are already there, but then who owns that shift, and what's the necessary skill set? What are the skill set gaps in the industry right now?
Yeah, I can go first if nobody wants. All right. So maybe to answer the first question first, how can we begin building the foundation? So I believe it would be beneficial for companies and also the research landscape if the data creators really team up and release a public data set consisting of bodies, of measurements, maybe even with a license fee for commercial usage, because bodies are common to everyone. And it's also a very interesting scientific problem for the computer vision and machine learning researchers. And that way we would really help ourselves meeting the customer's expectations way better. And we would also help society progress scientifically, which would then yield a feedback loop, right? Because as science progresses, our models also get better, right? Because we can then easily pick them off the shelf. So that's one bit. Now, the other thing with the purchase history is a bit more difficult, I would say. First things first, if at all, then that data has to be anonymized. So nobody wants the name attached to it and being openly available online. So privacy has to be respected. And then that would enable also publicly to connect these two domains, the body data and the purchase history. That's also something you can already gain a lot of insight from. And maybe with the product specifications, I assume they will most likely remain internal. But it would be beneficial if shared, because the main challenge here is that most companies still don't create 3D models of their garments. And that's really the first step towards reaching the high accuracy we're looking for. That may be for the first question. So who owns this shift? Obviously, the owners of the data, and if involved, the research community, which can really be a very nice synergy. And now the necessary skill set, it's really data engineering, gathering all the data, saving it in the right places, data science, doing the analytics, having statistics knowledge to really do proper analyses, and then also training machine learning models in order to really learn and also learn the feeling, really. Learn the feeling of the people of how the clothing would feel on them. So the emotion of fit,
learn the emotion of fit.
Yeah, learn the taste, exactly.
And then how far away from how far away are we from that?
Actually, we are quite close, I would say. The only disturbing thing about all of this is really that the data is heavily biased towards, for example, if it's about bodies, it's mostly white males, which you find in public repositories. Now, if you look at fashion data sets, people wearing fancy things in weird poses, then it's mostly females. So, and we really want to cater to everybody's needs and not only be specialized on, let's say, the European population, the Northwestern or the US population. We really want to cater to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to chime in with a perspective?
Yeah, I think the way that we at Reactive Reality think about this is how can we actually help brands, help retailers make the consumer experience more fun? Because if it's something that it's fun and it offers some value, then that's going to increase engagement, right? We can look at any different, you name the platform that people spend their time on. It's for those reasons, right? It's offering them something of value and it's something that's fun. And so for us, it's giving the users, or in this case, the shoppers, a chance to create their own avatar, right, with the use of a smartphone, and then to be able to sort of take that avatar, that personalized avatar, into a virtual dressing room. And to the previous point, the brand then needs to be prepared, right? The brand needs to be able to create a 3D wardrobe or even a two-dimensional wardrobe, but a virtual wardrobe, which can be done at scale on the platform, where you actually are doing lots of mixing and matching and just a very engaging process. And from there, that's how that data collection actually can begin to build on itself, because it's something that is driven, it's consumer driven, and it's whether through word of mouth or maybe some advertising by the brand, et cetera. So I definitely think that the more we can make it appealing to the ultimate consumer, the ultimate shopper, the data itself will take care. It won't be this grand sort of experiment kind of thing. It will just come together quickly. The person who should own it, and to your point about talent at different brands and retailers, I think this person maybe already exists, quite frankly, in many organizations, but it is this person that is just laser focused on the customer experience. And so some people have customer experience officers, but they may call it customer success. I'm not sure the titles for everyone's organization, but it's that person that needs to really focus on that consumer or shopper experience. And if I were to really get up on my soapbox and preach to them, it would be certain habits in online shopping we've become too comfortable with, and that's the yield. The yield of, if 100 shoppers show up, I get a 1% yield on that experience, and I'm resigned to that. And if I want to gain market share, I need to increase my budget for my traffic acquisition costs so I can get 200 shoppers to go there, so I can get 2. Right. Well, if we focus on the consumer experience, the yield will actually take care of itself. How can I get 2, 3, 5% yield from those same 100 shoppers? How can I get them to engage with my brand more, come back more often, be an evangelist for me? All of that, I think, is closely tied to the consumer experience, and actually it is close. There are lots of competitors in the marketplace, and I will say, from our standpoint at Reactive Reality, we are very close and are doing this in market right now. So folks shouldn't think this is a year or two away. It is now, for sure.
It's almost putting the theatre back into retail, right? Essentially putting the entertainment back into retail.
I mean, shopping should be fun. The last decade has been spent on reducing the friction of the checkout process, which we could argue back and forth. That's time well spent, I think. But now, what can we do to actually reduce the friction at the front end to help more people get into a virtual dressing room, embrace augmented virtual reality more, and then spend as much time as they want in a fun setting, right? Because that's the point. That's the point, is to have some fun with this, not just check off something from the to-do list.
Do you think there's a sort of secondary question, and then I'll pitch it back to the panel. Do you think there's a need to be consistent between brick and mortar and e-commerce from an experience standpoint?
The quick answer is I don't feel that way, because it is a new experience. It's actually, I would liberate the brands from trying to be overly consistent in their omni-channel. Certainly there needs to be brand guidelines. Certainly there needs to be a certain level of sort of what it means to be, to walk into a brand XYZ store, whether online or brick and mortar. But I would encourage people not to get overly caught up with trying to replicate what's already been done with modern technology. Those are two different tools, right? And so I think we should be challenging ourselves to say, okay, on a product detail page, do I want to have the same resolution of a 3D garment that I might of a very stylized 2D photo? And my quick answer would be someday, yes, maybe. However, today that is going to create such a large file size that it's possible. It's just going to create lag in your online marketplace. It's not actually going to be a great customer experience. Yeah. And you already have the 2D photo. So let's give them a different experience. That's a virtual dressing room. That's like mixing and matching. That's the ability to share on social media, whatever it might be. I think the possibilities are just up to the imagination. But once again, as I like to say, to get started, it's give the customer something to look at, give the customer something to play with, and then they will actually help guide where your extra investments go.
Give them more than they have right now. Essentially.
Something. Just give them something more. Yes.
Opening it up to the rest of the panel. Any perspectives?
I just have a quick remark for Steve. It's only meant to be helpful. So I think there's some danger in putting too much fun into this, because then the customer can easily be distracted, right? And his intention was actually shopping, but then he realizes, oh, this technology is so fun, I'm just going to try out different things and then go away and lay in bed. Where actually the original intention was to purchase something for the summer vacation or so, and then the distraction started. So we really have to make sure that by offering all of those nice things that can also deliver advantages, such as those virtual fitting rooms, that we do not introduce any media breaks or make the path to the checkout unnecessarily long. It's something which I believe should be maintained.
I love that point. And the good news is we don't have to debate it. Let's go get the data, right? Let's see what happens. But for many brands that I think are going to grow and make it, let's say whether you're an Amazon or a Facebook or a marketplace, but even brands I think are going to get into marketplace scenarios, discoverability is going to become very difficult in the current linear process of online shopping. So how do I create a recommendation engine, and how do I push things into that virtual dressing room for folks? And then to your point, how much is enough and how much is too much? And then we have to monitor that, I think. But always with the consumer in mind.
Yeah, and that could be different by consumer segment, right? Brand or consumer segment. Yeah, that sort of ability to adopt and absorb, I think, is going to be different. Before I got a question from the audience, but before I ask it, is there any other points?
I just wanted to add one point, actually, just going back to the original question of who owns this shift, so presumably within the brand or retailer, who within the organization owns this shift towards this holy grail of collecting this data and having this great feedback loop and all these things around virtual fit. So I just wanted to remark here, so something that I would love to see us as an industry move towards this being a thing that who owns the shift within the organization. So, typically if we're, integrating a tool on the website, on their e-commerce site, we're usually working with the e-com team, and the VP of e-com is leading that effort and the ultimate decision maker typically. But what I'd like to see more of is it's hard to figure out how to mechanize it, but how can we get more buy-in and interest internally within the product design side? Because they're often, depending on how large the retailer is, quite different organizations, and we have to figure out how to build a bridge between the two islands, if you will. So we're always trying to figure out, within our process of talking with, if we're selling a tool for e-com integration, how can we get the product designers involved in the data that we're that we're collecting, so that they can get interested in that aspect of it and get more internal buy-in on the kinds of insights that we're generating over time. And so that's always been sort of an interesting discovery mechanism that we take of how can we get more buy-in throughout the organization on the kind of tool that we're building together with the brand beyond just the e-com team itself. So if anyone has insights on how they've done on that aspect of things, but we're always trying, and we always find that if we can get more of the product designer side of the organization involved in the work that we're doing together, then it's just such a better experience overall with the product and services that we can provide if we have the organization of a whole seeing the value of the data that we produce.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I like Steve's perspective on that sort of consumer experience, right? A consumer experience officer. I've got a concept that I'm sort of evangelizing, if you like, which is a play on CFO, and I've called it a chief fit officer, and it's owning fit end to end. Because, Daina, to your point, the communication of fit is very different from the creation of fit, right? And of course, it's product. What we're talking about is product, but the fit is an attribute of product. But I think
so related too. So it's we should be talking the same language. But to get it on the site, to get the tool implemented, it's a very different team than the people that are actually completely involved in the fit aspect of the brand. So.
And then when you push it through, the people that own it versus the subject matter experts, it's generally they're two different functions as well. So it's interesting. I think structurally we've got quite a long way to go. But then one could argue that e-commerce is relatively new, right? I know a lot of retailers that I've worked in, or wholesalers, should I say, a lot of wholesalers where I've worked, e-com is just another wholesale channel. right? Which is, interesting in itself. But again, I'm going off script. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. I did want to ask this question because I thought it was quite interesting. So the question came in: kids are your hardest audience, and they tell it like it is and see it unfiltered. Should we not begin using fit data with this market, as they're more likely to buy into the tech rather than older buyers with unchangeable buying habits? Kids have taught us how to use Netflix and Zoom in lockdown, so why not start with kids? Anybody want to respond to that? I don't disagree. I think it's a good question. The challenge is, again, that difference between the wearer, which is a kid, and the purchaser, which tends to be their parent.
So I'll jump in, and Daina, to follow up with your point, you don't have that problem with my group, because actually my team has already collaborated somehow with Daina's team as well as our e-commerce division. So why don't we start with kids? I think COPA is really the reason why, the privacy. That really become a showstopper in many instances. That's a challenge. We're more than willing and happy and wanting to begin, but there are so many rules and regulations that we need to overcome.
Yeah, which again, I think Sydney brought up earlier in terms of how do we make this more of a scientific collection? So it's less about brands trying to get data on bodies of consumers, and it's more about we're trying to do this to get growth of the population and societal demographics, if you like. Is that for? Did I reference you correctly, Sydney?
Yeah, I'd say so. Though I must say, I believe also in the scientific community, you'll have issues publishing children's data. So as was said before, I believe the privacy issues are really a blocker here. But there are ways one can try to circumvent this issue simply by not looking at, let's say, real captured children's bodies, but simply by creating synthetic children's bodies and then doing the fit on there.
And there's probably, and that actually segues into probably the last bullet point, and I'm not an expert in this one, so I'm going to ask the question and then totally step back. But how far does synthetic data reach? And how can we bridge the gap between synthetic data and real data? Sydney's smiling. I'm going to pick on you, Sydney. Have you got a perspective?
Yeah, sure. We actually work quite a bit on synthetic data, and part of this is actually due to COVID, because it's so hard to meet people in person and take pictures of them. Well, a quick solution to generate thousands of bodies is just to use softwares like Clo3D and use 3D body models such as SMPL to create realistic avatars, and then use that data in order to try and predict the size of it, because it really has this correspondence between the 3D avatar and actual body measurements. And then, well, there's still a huge gap between the synthetic data and the real data. For example, usually you'll have different backgrounds, different locations, wearing different kind of clothes, different degrees of bagginess, let's say. So all of that has to be transferred into the digital realm. And it can be done by lots and lots of machine learning techniques. One example, you may know it, is a cycle gun, where you can turn a horse into a zebra and vice versa. So you can really play with backgrounds and with the appearance of things, and can create super realistic collections of synthetic data. So that's an interesting avenue. But the most interesting bit about it is that if you have that synthetic data and you have real data, there's a great synergy between the two.
Mm-hmm. Is there, again, this is not my area of expertise, but a naive question, is there a utopian balance? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40, 70-30?
Well, the thing is, you can, within, let's say, a week, create 1 million synthetic bodies in realistic environments, right? Whereas when looking at data sets of real people, it's more in dozens of thousands. So it's a different order of magnitude. And due to the augmentation you add to the real data by the synthetic data, you gain some accuracy.
Okay.
So it's like 10% real data, if you will, and 90% synthetic data.
Interesting. Right? Interesting. Steve, did you have a perspective?
I was just going to quickly add, like, I agree, and we're bridging the gap more and more every day, just like because of the great work that Sydney and others are doing on this panel. So the bridge is getting shorter and shorter. What I would say is, if we think about the consumers, the reason why we want this is because it means that it lowers the friction for them getting even more involved, because they can actually put in 1 or 2 or 5 less, let's call it, real measurements, because the synthetic data can then be modeled out. And so if we really get this flywheel going as an industry, this will be very powerful for consumer adoption overall. And so that synthetic data will be very powerful, just from the avatar standpoint, let alone from the garment standpoint, where that might lead to just more understanding of the semantic data of the fabric, right? We might want some real data to start and inform, but then understanding how silk might look versus leather versus other things, and really being able to then give someone a more the most realistic view of a garment. And so once again, both of these, what do? They come together and they increase that confidence, right, in the purchasing decision. So.